The ballroom was alive with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the flashes of paparazzi cameras. It was a night meant for celebration, a Hollywood fundraiser where the biggest names in entertainment and politics gathered under one roof. The event was elegant, the kind of place where reputations were built, and sometimes destroyed. Among the guests was Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor who had long been admired for his humility and kindness. And standing quietly in the background, away from the flashing lights, was Barron Trump. The young man, often seen but rarely heard, had attended as a guest of a well-known philanthropist. He wasn't seeking attention, but by the end of the night, he would be the only thing people were talking about. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow we've got another story you won't want to miss. It all started when a liberal journalist stepped up to Keanu, microphone in hand, with a smirk that hinted at something more than just a friendly question. Keanu, you're known for playing the nice guy in movies, but in real life, isn't it just an act? I mean, let's be real, you're still just another rich Hollywood elite. The question sliced through the air like a knife. Conversations stopped, heads turned. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but most people waited, wondering how Keanu would respond. He didn't. Because before he could even open his mouth, Barron Trump spoke up. Barron's voice was calm, measured, yet it carried a weight that immediately shifted the energy in the room. "That's an interesting question," he said, tilting his head slightly. "But let me ask you something. How do you define authenticity? Is it measured by wealth, by fame, or is it defined by how someone treats the people around them?" The journalist blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected counter. He had come prepared to put Keanu on the spot, not to be questioned himself. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Keanu, still standing beside Barron, watched with quiet amusement, a slight smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. He had been in Hollywood long enough to recognize when someone was about to get exposed. Barron continued, his expression unwavering. "Keanu Reeves has given away millions to charities without ever making a spectacle of it. He rides the subway, he talks to fans, he treats every person with respect, whether they're a billionaire or a barista. If that's an act, then I'd love to see more people fake it." A few people in the crowd chuckled, nodding in agreement. The journalist, shifting uncomfortably, tried to recover. "Well, sure, but doesn't that just make him an exception? Most celebrities pretend to care while living in their own bubble." Barron's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "And that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Instead of celebrating the people who do the right thing, you try to lump them in with those who don't, just because it makes a better headline. You're not asking questions to uncover the truth. You're asking questions to create a narrative." The air in the room thickened. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You know, I've never been interested in labels. I just try to live my life the best I can. If that's not good enough for the media, well, that's not really my problem, is it?" The journalist, realizing he was quickly losing ground, fumbled for a response. But Barron wasn't done yet. Barron took a small step forward, closing the distance between himself and the journalist. His voice remained steady, but there was a quiet intensity behind his words that made it impossible to ignore him. "Let's talk about privilege," Barron said, his gaze locked on the reporter. "You want to paint Keanu as just another rich celebrity detached from reality. But tell me, what exactly has he done to deserve that label? Because last I checked, privilege isn't about money. It's about what you do with the opportunities you're given." The journalist opened his mouth, but Barron didn't give him the chance. "Keanu has used his platform to help others. He's donated to children's hospitals, funded education programs, and helped countless people in need without seeking praise or recognition. Meanwhile, you use your platform to tear people down. So, tell me, which one of you is really out of touch?" A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some guests exchanged knowing glances, others nodded in quiet agreement. The journalist, clearly rattled, forced a chuckle. "All right, fair point," he said, trying to regain his footing. "But let's not pretend Hollywood isn't full of hypocrisy. Celebrities love to act like they care while living in their gated mansions." Barron tilted his head slightly as if analyzing the statement. "That's true," he admitted. "There are hypocrites in Hollywood, just like there are hypocrites in journalism, in politics, in every industry. But the difference is, when you find someone who's not a hypocrite, someone who actually walks the walk, You don't acknowledge them. You try to drag them down with the rest. The journalist stiffened, but Barron wasn't done. You don't care about truth. You care about clicks. That's why Keanu isn't the problem here. You are. A hush fell over the room. The weight of Barron's words lingered in the air. Even those who didn't typically align with his family had to admit. He had just delivered a brutal reality check. Keanu, standing beside him, simply nodded, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Well said," he murmured. The journalist, now visibly uncomfortable, glanced around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The eyes of the entire room were on him. The journalist shifted his weight, forcing another awkward laugh. All right, you've made your point," he said, trying to downplay the situation. "But let's not pretend like the media is the enemy here. We're just doing our job, asking the tough questions." Barron didn't flinch. He let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding, his voice even calmer than before. "Tough questions?" he repeated. "There's a difference between asking tough questions and asking loaded ones. A tough question challenges someone on their actions. A loaded question assumes guilt before they even answer." A murmur ran through the audience. The journalist's face hardened, but Barron wasn't backing down. You weren't asking Keanu about his work, his views, or his career. You were setting him up, implying that his kindness isn't real, that he must be fake simply because he's successful. That's not journalism. That's manipulation. A few people in the room audibly muttered their agreement. Even those who had stayed silent up until now were nodding, recognizing the truth in Barron's words. The journalist exhaled sharply, trying to compose himself. "Okay then," he said, attempting to sound unfazed. "Since we're talking about narratives, let's talk about yours. You're the son of a former president. You've lived a life of wealth and privilege. Why should anyone listen to you about authenticity?" A hush fell over the room again. The crowd leaned in slightly, sensing the weight of the moment. But Barron didn't seem rattled. Instead, he smiled, just slightly. "That's a great question," he said, "and I'll tell you why." The room was silent now, the journalist's own trap turning against him. Privilege is a tool. It can be used to help or to harm. The difference between someone like Keanu and some of the people you write about isn't their money. It's their choices. The journalist folded his arms, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. "And what choices have you made, Barron?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of defiance. "The choice to speak when something is wrong," Barron answered without hesitation. "And right now, what's wrong is people like you pretending to be the moral authority while tearing down those who actually do good." The room was holding its breath. Keanu, arms crossed now, simply nodded. "Well said," he murmured again. But Barron wasn't finished yet. Barron took another step forward, his presence commanding the room in a way no one had expected. His voice remained steady, unshaken. "You want to talk about privilege? Fine, let's talk about it. But let's be honest about what it really is." The journalist's smirk had disappeared completely. Privilege isn't just about money. It's about access, influence, and most of all, choice. Keanu Reeves has all of those things, and what does he do with them? He gives, he helps. He chooses to be the kind of person who lifts others up. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The tide had turned completely. Meanwhile, you sit here with your microphone and your platform, using your privilege to attack, to discredit, to spin narratives that fit your agenda. And for what? A few extra clicks? A headline that lasts 24 hours? The journalist opened his mouth, but Barron raised a hand slightly, signaling he wasn't finished. The real problem isn't privilege. The problem is how it's used. You could use yours to highlight real stories, people doing good, making a difference. But instead, you choose to tear down someone who embodies kindness just because it's easier, just because it makes for better drama. The weight of Barron's words settled over the room. The journalist's confidence had completely evaporated. He looked around, but there was no one coming to his defense. Keanu, standing beside Barron, finally spoke again. "I've been in this industry a long time," he said, his voice smooth, measured. "And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the loudest voices aren't always the right ones." He glanced at Barron, then back at the journalist. "But I think you just learned that lesson yourself." A few guests chuckled. The journalist shifted uncomfortably. He was losing this battle, and he knew it. But Barron wasn't done making his point. Barron let the journalist's discomfort linger for a moment before continuing, his voice still calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. You claim to ask tough questions, but let's flip the script. Let's ask a real tough question. Why do people like you always go after the ones who don't fight back? The journalist stiffened. The crowd, now fully engaged, murmured in anticipation. Keanu Reeves doesn't play your game. He doesn't get into Twitter fights. He doesn't call out the media. He just lives his life with kindness and respect. And yet, instead of admiring that, you look for ways to discredit him. A few guests nodded in agreement. The journalist opened his mouth, but Barron wasn't done. Why? Because it's easy. Because it's safer to attack the good ones, the ones who won't hit back. You wouldn't dare pull this on someone who actually thrives on controversy, would you? The journalist said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. See, that's the thing about people like you, Barron continued, his words sharper now. You don't go after the corrupt. You don't go after the real phonies. You go after the ones who set an example. Because deep down, you know that real goodness, the kind that doesn't need an audience, makes your job harder. It makes it harder to sell cynicism. It makes it harder to pretend that everyone is just as bad as the worst among us. Keanu folded his arms, a quiet smile on his face. That's a really good point, he muttered. The journalist's face was now completely drained of its earlier confidence. He shifted uncomfortably, looking for a way out of the conversation. But Barron wasn't done yet. So, here's my question for you, Barron said, tilting his head slightly. If Keanu Reeves is not authentic, then who is? Name one person you think is actually deserving of respect. The journalist hesitated. The question had backed him into a corner. If he named someone, he risked contradicting himself. If he didn't, he would confirm what everyone already suspected, that he wasn't interested in respect at all, just in creating controversy. The silence stretched for too long. Exactly, Barron said, his tone final. The crowd reacted with hushed awe. The journalist had no comeback. Barron had not only defended Keanu, but he had also exposed the game being played in front of everyone. The journalist swallowed hard, gripping his microphone a little tighter. The tension in the air was unbearable, and for the first time that evening, he seemed to realize he wasn't in control of this conversation anymore. Barron remained composed, his expression unreadable, his presence unshaken. You see, he continued, it's easy to be a critic. It's easy to sit behind a screen or a microphone and judge people without ever actually doing anything yourself. But let's talk about something harder. Let's talk about accountability. The journalist's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't interrupt. If Keanu Reeves, someone who's known for his generosity, his humility, and his kindness, if he isn't good enough for you, then who is? Who meets your impossible standards? Or is it just easier to assume that no one is truly good, so you never have to admit when you're wrong? A few people in the crowd let out murmurs of agreement. The walls were closing in on the journalist, and he knew it. He shifted slightly, trying to regain his footing. Look, I'm just doing my job, he finally said, his voice quieter than before. It's not personal. Barron raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Not personal, he echoed. That's the excuse, isn't it? It's just business. It's just a headline. It's just content. Barron let out a short breath, shaking his head slightly. But here's the thing. It is personal. You know why? Because words matter. Narratives matter. You don't get to attack someone's character, question their integrity, and then pretend like it's all harmless when you get called out for it. The journalist pressed his lips together, unable to argue. He had built his career on spinning stories, on planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the public. But tonight, the script had been flipped. Keanu Reeves has never asked for attention. He's never begged for recognition. He does what he does because it's the right thing to do. And yet, instead of acknowledging that, you try to reduce him to a stereotype, to a privileged Hollywood elite. Barron's eyes narrowed slightly. But maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't Keanu. Maybe the problem is that people like you can't stand the idea that there are still good people in the world. The crowd murmured louder this time. The energy in the room had shifted entirely. People weren't just watching a debate anymore. They were witnessing a complete dismantling of a media tactic they had seen too many times before. The journalist looked around, as if hoping someone would come to his defense. But no one did. Even those who might have agreed with him moments earlier were now silent, unwilling to challenge the truth Barron had just laid bare. Keanu, ever the quiet observer, finally broke his silence again. "You know," he said, glancing at the journalist, "for someone who claims to be asking the tough questions, you don't seem to like answering them." The crowd chuckled, the tension breaking slightly. The journalist let out a sharp exhale, his frustration evident, but he still had no response. And Barron? He was just getting started. Barron took a slow breath, letting the silence linger. The journalist, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted, and everyone knew it. "Let's get one thing straight," Barron said, his voice steady. "You don't actually care about the truth. If you did, you'd be asking about Keanu's work, his philanthropy, or the ways he's impacted people's lives. Instead, you're asking a loaded question designed to undermine everything he stands for." The journalist tried to interject, but Barron wasn't done. And why? Because negativity sells. Because it's easier to question goodness than it is to acknowledge it. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The journalist let out a dry chuckle, trying to mask his discomfort. "All right, I get it. You're protective of Keanu, that's admirable. But let's be real. He doesn't need defending." Barron tilted his head slightly. "No, he doesn't." A pause. "But the truth does." That hit differently. The audience knew it, the journalist knew it, and judging by the subtle nod Keanu gave, he knew it too. "You see, that's the real issue here," Barron continued. "You and your colleagues have spent years twisting narratives, turning decent people into villains because it's good for ratings. And when someone finally pushes back, you act like you're the victim." The journalist's lips pressed into a thin line. He was losing, and he knew it. "I don't have an agenda," he muttered. Barron's brow lifted slightly, his expression almost amused. "Of course you do. Everyone does. The difference is, I'm not pretending I don't." Another murmur from the crowd. A few people even clapped. Keanu, standing beside Barron, exhaled softly before speaking. "You know, I've never really understood why people feel the need to tear others down, just to make a point." He turned toward the journalist, his expression unreadable. "But I think I get it now. It's not about me. It's about control. It's about making sure people never believe in something too much, because if they do, they might start questioning the people who make a living off their doubt." The words hung in the air. The journalist clenched his jaw. Barron, his voice quiet but firm, sealed the moment. "Exactly." The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were feeling the weight of what was happening, and the journalist, he had nowhere left to go. The journalist exhaled sharply, his frustration now evident. He had walked into this moment expecting to control the narrative, but now he was the narrative. Barron remained poised, his expression unreadable, his stance unwavering. He had no need to raise his voice or act out. He had already won. "You see, this isn't just about Keanu," Barron continued, his voice calm but unrelenting. "This is about how the media operates. You don't ask these questions because you're interested in the truth. You ask them because you already have an answer in mind, and you're just hoping to twist someone's words until it fits your story." The crowd murmured louder this time. People weren't just watching anymore. They were invested. The journalist let out another dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Look, I get it. You're making me out to be the bad guy here, but I'm just asking the questions the public wants answers to." Barron's eyes narrowed slightly. "No," he said simply. "You're asking the questions you want answers to. There's a difference." The journalist's smirk faltered. Barron stepped forward slightly, closing the distance between them. "If you really wanted to know what the public cared about, you'd ask about real issues. You'd ask about the causes Keanu supports, the work he does, or the struggles people face outside of your media bubble." A pause. "But instead, you ask questions designed to create doubt, to manufacture controversy, to turn good people into targets, because that's what keeps you relevant." The journalist shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny. Keanu crossed his arms, his quiet approval evident. He didn't need to add anything. Barron was saying everything that needed to be said. "And here's the irony," Barron added, his tone steady. "The more you try to discredit people like Keanu, the more you expose yourselves. Because people aren't as blind as you think they are. They see through it. They're tired of it." A slow clap started from somewhere in the crowd, then another and another. The journalist's face burned with frustration, but there was no way out now. He had picked the wrong target at the wrong time. Barron glanced at Keanu, then back at the journalist. So, I'll ask you one more time. If Keanu Reeves isn't someone worth respecting, who is? Silence. The journalist had no answer. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Every eye in the room was on the journalist, waiting for an answer that wasn't coming. He shifted, glancing around as if searching for a lifeline. But there was none. Barron held his gaze, unwavering. That's what I thought. The words weren't loud, they weren't aggressive, but they carried a weight that crushed any last attempt at resistance. The journalist had been completely dismantled, not by insults, not by outrage, but by sheer, undeniable truth. Keanu, who had stood quietly for most of the exchange, finally broke the tension. You know, he said, his voice thoughtful, I've spent my whole career trying to stay out of the negativity, trying to do my best, trying to focus on what really matters. He turned toward Barron, nodding slightly. And it's nice to know there are still people out there who recognize that. The crowd, already hanging on to every word, erupted into applause. But this wasn't the usual polite, forced kind of clapping you hear at events like this. This was real. People stood, some whistled, others simply nodded in approval. The journalist, now completely deflated, cleared his throat and muttered something about having other people to interview. But as he turned to leave, Barron spoke one last time. One more thing. The journalist stopped in his tracks. Slowly he turned back. Next time you want to question someone's character, make sure it's someone who actually deserves it. The crowd roared. Keanu smirked, giving Barron a pat on the back as the journalist quickly disappeared into the sea of guests. Social media was already blowing up. Clips of the exchange had been captured on phones, and within minutes, number Barron defends Keanu was trending worldwide. Tweets flooded in. Barron Trump just destroyed that journalist with nothing but class. Keanu didn't need defending, but man, Barron delivered a masterclass in shutting down media manipulation. This was like watching someone expose the system in real time. Even celebrities chimed in. Some defended the journalist, calling it a misunderstood question. But the overwhelming majority, they sided with Barron and Keanu. The next day, news outlets scrambled to control the narrative. Some tried spinning it, claiming the journalist had simply been misunderstood. Others ignored it completely, hoping it would blow over. But the damage was done. The world had seen the truth. And Barron Trump, he didn't say another word about it, because he didn't need to. His words had already done the job. As the event wrapped up, Keanu and Barron stood side by side for a brief moment. You didn't have to do that, Keanu said quietly. Barron just shrugged. Sometimes, you have to call things out for what they are. Keanu smiled. Well, that was one hell of a way to do it. The two shook hands, parting ways as the night came to a close. But for everyone in that room, and for the millions who would watch it later, one thing was certain. Barron Trump had just changed the game, and the media, they wouldn't be underestimating him again. And there you have it, one of the most unexpected and viral moments of the year. A journalist thought he could corner Keanu Reeves with a cheap shot, but instead, he ran straight into a reality check from Barron Trump. What do you think? Did Barron handle it perfectly? Should he have said even more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we've got more stories like this coming your way. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay bold, stay sharp, and never let the media rewrite the truth.